So my name's Nina Fogel. I'm a second year PhD student in the Camilo lab at St. Louis University. I'm really interested in bees in urban areas, and specifically I look at bees in urban residential gardens. We were able to establish a partnership with St. Louis Audubon. They have a program called Bring Conservation Home. And what Bring Conservation Home is, some of you might be enrolled in it or be much more familiar with it, is a program that certifies people's home gardens based on whether or not they meet certain conservation attributes. So that includes things like planting native plants, removing invasive plants, and then also providing habitat features such as canopy stratification, groundwater control like rain barrels, and also providing things for birds like bird feeders and bird baths, and things for bees and bats like bat houses and bee hotels. So it certifies gardens to one of three levels based on how many attributes they meet. So the lowest level is silver, then you have gold, and then you have platinum. And one thing that's great about this program is even if you don't meet those basics to be certified, you can stay in the program. So we have people that have high interest in conservation, but they haven't necessarily met the qualifications to be certified. And why this is really good is when you're doing research, you need to have a control group. So a group that hasn't necessarily, that is kind of more emblematic of a normal house as opposed to ones that are just people whose gardens, don't have any lawn and are completely native and things like that. So I'm interested in investigating the differences in bee diversity between these different yards, both by what is in the yard, mostly floral resources. I'll talk a little bit more about bees later. But the main thing is they essentially need flowers for food. So I'm interested in looking about how the different amounts of floral resources in their yard impact bee diversity, and then also the overall gradient of urbanization. So what that means is you have, really dense neighborhoods in like older areas. So if you've been to St. Louis, in the city, things like Tower Grove, they're really dense, they're kind of old, the houses are close together, the gardens are small. We say there's high impervious surface, which means based on the level of area, you have really high levels of concrete and asphalt. And then on the other extreme, you're gonna go through urban and then suburban and then finally exurban and rural. So exurban neighborhoods are ones that are often newer, they're really low density, they're kind of on the suburban fringe, so they're past the suburbs. And this is, parts of Wildwood, even parts out by like St. Charles and out past Chesterfield and things like that. So I'm interested to see how bee diversity is impacted by the resources you have in your yard, so the localized floral resources, and then also the effects of urbanization, because urbanization impacts different bees in different ways. Some do really, really well in urban areas and some don't. And some do really well in suburbs and some don't, but we don't really know which ones specifically do. So I'm interested in looking at how the diversity is different between different areas. So hopefully I will be able to get some of that research done this summer. A lot depends on, different stay-at-home orders and things like that, and the extent that it's safe to go out. But I'm really interested in investigating how the diversity differs, and I might be in someone who's listening right now yard, so that would be pretty cool. I'm happy to, let me just talk a little bit about bees and then I'll take all your questions. So for bees, there's 20,000 species of bees worldwide. In the state of Missouri, we have about 450. And then in the St. Louis region, we have about 204, I think is the last count. So we have about 45% of the bee diversity of the entire state is in the St. Louis area. And A lot of those bees are actually in urban areas. So St. Louis is unique in that I'm sure if you've read anything about, the 1918 Spanish flu, you've heard about St. Louis and the fact that we are one of the largest cities in the country. So St. Louis was super dense, had lots of people, and then through a combination of lots of different things, economic changes, that St. Louis got hugely depopulated. So now we have whole parts of the north side of the city that have really low human density. And so there's lots of abandoned lots. That part of the city is also poor. If you don't have a lot of money, you probably don't really care if your lawn is perfectly green and even and neat. So there's lots of weeds growing through the cracks, just like lots that have kind of abandoned, which is obviously not necessarily great, but for a silver lining of less pesticide use, less management, is you actually have a lot of bees. So there's a lot higher bee diversity in the north side of the city than there is in the south side of the city in St. Louis. And that's because we're essentially leaving them alone. There's a lot less people going around. There's just not as much happening. There's not as much pesticides or mowing. So there's a lot more bees. And we really need bees. So bees are responsible for essentially like 2/3 of everything we eat is pollinated by bees. And it's not necessarily the calories. A lot of the calories are coming from grains and rice, which are wind pollinated. But I would say all the good foods are like pollinated by an insect. So most of those are bees. That's a lot of our fruits. So, tomatoes, squashes, cucumbers, apples, all those are pollinated by bees. And then you have some things pollinated by flies, like chocolate is fly pollinated. And then you even have some things that are pollinated by bats. So tequila, which is made from agave is bat pollinated. So we really need our pollinators, and urban areas can provide a great refuge for them. They can find a lot of resources from people planting things in their gardens or just weeds growing up through the cracks. And because bees are negatively affected by different pesticides, agricultural areas are harder and harder to live. So cities can really be a refuge for bee diversity because they can find resources in people's yards. Circle back to my research. I'm interested in how bees are surviving in urban areas. And with that, if anyone has any questions, I might interject in with another little rant again. But if anyone has any questions about bees, urban areas, gardens, or anything about me, I'm happy to answer them as I take a sip of my coffee. Okay, plants I can get for bees. They need the pollen. What about nesting sites? Okay, yes. So gardening for for bees is really about providing plants that bees like. So there's two. I'm going to oversimplify a little bit, but there's two types of bees. There's specialists. Those are your really picky eaters. So those are ones that only go to a few certain types of plants. And then you have your generalists, and those bees are going to be the ones that can go to a lot of different things. So you want to plant things that definitely attract generalists because you're going to be attracting a larger number of species, but you also want to plant things that are maybe going to help a few species that really depend on what you're planting. So good generalist things are and also good things to plant are native plants because they're going to be attracting the bees that live in the area. And then also plants that aren't like horticultural varieties. And that's kind of hard to tell sometimes, but there's a lot of plants that have been bred for certain traits so much that they don't really provide many resources to bees. Some of them could like not even have any nectar or pollen anymore. And so pollen is what the females collect to provision their eggs. And then nectar is what both the females and males eat for energy. So for example, pansies like don't really have any pollen anymore. They're pretty much useless because they've been bred for how they look, not for the services they provide. So you definitely want to try to find plants that are native. It depends on your area, but a lot of them in Missouri, some of them are tagged with the Grow Native logo, and that shows that they're native plants. So some great ones for bees that are pretty easy to find in the Midwest. Bee balm, which is also called Monarda, which is also called horseman, I think. There's like 8 different names. But if you type in bee balm or Monarda, you'll find it. That's great for bees. That's a mint. It's really easy flower for a lot of bees to get to. So that one's great. I always say if you want to support the home team, opening day just passed and obviously there's no baseball, but you can get cardinal flowers. Those are great for bees. So those are some generalists. A lot of things, things in the mint family, things in the aster family. So any daisies or cone flowers or sunflowers, those are all great. And then if you want to help specialist bees, things like, really anything, like there's the Claytonia Virginia right now. There's a specialist bee for that. Hibiscus, there's a specialist bee for that. If you want to learn more about hibiscus, check out Jenny's talk, which is on our page from a few days ago. So really anything that's native is going to provide resources. Something I learned the other day, which is really cool, is the daffodils don't really provide much for bees in terms of nectar and pollen, but they're like giant sun bathing things. So the bees will actually, because they're out really early when it's still cold out, so bees need to warm up so they can fly. So you'll actually find bees that will land on the flower on the head of the dandelion, and then they'll just sun there. So those are actually really good for just giving the early spring bees a place to sun on. And then as far as nesting, so I think it's like, don't exactly quote me on the stats, but I'm pretty sure like 2/3 of bees they're called solitary. So what that means is a single female provisions her nest and lays her own eggs. So this is different from what you might think of as a honeybees, in which case there's one queen and she has a giant hive. So instead it's one female, she finds a male, she mates, and she's gonna lay her own eggs. So that could be anywhere between laying like 3 and 10 eggs per female. And about 2/3 of bees, at least in this area, nest in the ground. So the female is going to dig a hole into the ground, and that's where she's going to lay her eggs. Now, the type of soil she lays in really depends on the type of bee. There's bees that really like sand, actually. I've been to a sand volleyball court and found bees that are able to dig into the sand. There's other ones that like really, really dense clay soil. But a lot of them just kind of like loosely packed bare soil, and that's what they'll lay their eggs in. So finding a patch of your ground, this doesn't have to be, right in the front, but in a back corner or whatever, just leaving a patch with nothing on it, just kind of loosely tilled soil and not touching it. Don't till it up or anything after you do the initial tilling. That's a really good thing to leave for bees. I brought a book. Let me see if I can find a photo real quick. Okay, I can't. Let's see. I don't know how well y'all can see this, but there is a female bee scouting out a nesting site. So, having the soil and sun at least partially is good. A lot of the bees need the initial sun coming into their nest in the morning in order for them to wake up. So having a little bit of sun, especially like morning sun, would be ideal for the bees. Most bees, except for bumblebees and a few others, don't have the ability to self-regulate their body temperature. So they need to warm up in the sun. So having some early morning sun will really help them get up early in the morning and start foraging for nectar and pollen and things like that. Okay, we got another question about should I get a honeybee hive? So I don't know if you know, but honeybees are actually non-native to North America. So they're in the same classification as chickens and cattle in that they're considered livestock. And what that means is they can't survive without human management. So right now, honeybees are really important for commercial success of a lot of crops. They're trucked around the country for providing pollination services. But the thing about honeybees is they're pretty bad at pollinating. They're really good at like going for the nectar and just avoiding the pollen entirely, and that's how pollination occurs, is when pollen moves from one flower to another flower. So they're not very good at it. I think the stat is you need 1,000 honeybees in apple orchards for every one native bee. So one native bee is at 1,000 times better at pollinating than honeybees. Also, when you truck them around the country, they get lots of diseases and things like that. You might have read about colony collapse disorder and things like that. But obviously, at this point, we still need them for agricultural to some extent, and people like to eat honey and things like that. But if you're trying to support bees or save the bees, getting a honeybee hive is not the way to go. Honeybees are fine; they're going to do fine without us, without our meddling. But what we really need to do is support native bees. And to do that, I'd say planting native plants is really the best way to go. Honeybees, it's like saying that like buying a chicken is saving birds. They have their uses. I just had eggs this morning. But if you want to support bees, honeybees, especially in North America, it's not the way to go. And actually, it's becoming a problem in urban areas. For example, in Berlin and Paris, so many people, honeybees are native there, but native they're at one density. But so many people have gotten hives there that there's actually so many honeybees and there's not enough food for them to eat that they're dying left and right because the density is too high. Also, these honeybees are outcompeting native bees. If you're gonna get a hive, like really make sure you know what you're doing, that there's enough resources around, and that you're just cognizant of the ramifications of it. Also, like really make sure there's enough resources around so that your hive doesn't go feral and end up swarming someone or something. So that's that question. Okay, let's see. We got another question about ground nesting bees in gardens. So the question is, it's hard to keep bare soil in the sun that doesn't grow weeds. So it's okay if there's little plants growing here and there. You just don't want it like taken over by like an entire lawn. So you'll obviously get you'll get a little bit, but of little things growing, and that's fine. You just want to make sure that the bee kind of has a hole through the weeds to get to the bare ground, because they're really good. They're really good at digging up the ground, but they have a hard time getting through the weeds. I'm trying to find a picture right now of their mandibles. Let's see. Oh, I can't find one. Okay, here's some. So these I don't think are actually ground nesters, but you can see those big, there's actually the arrow pointing to it right there. So those are called mandibles, and those are, they're essentially their mouth parts. So they'll use their mandibles and then also their front legs to dig up the ground. And this is just the females. So they're specialized and they're evolved to dig up the bare ground. They can't make it through really dense vegetation, but little bits of weeds here and there are okay. Leaf litter. Yeah, leaf litter is great, especially for for overwintering bees. So that's when you're going to have the most leaf litter, is when the leaves fall off the trees and they die. And Female bumblebee queens will actually, some of them will just, they don't nest a hole in the ground, they just like bury themselves into the leaf litter, and that's where they'll spend the winter. So leaving your leaf litter on the ground is actually really great. It also, starts to slowly decompose and provides nutrients back into the soil. But yeah, leaf litter is fine. I think they're able to move away the individual leaves if there's like a few leaves on the ground to get to the bare ground. But yeah, in general, trying to keep your garden obviously still aesthetically pleasing to you, but at the same time as natural as possible is always best. So leaving the leaf litter, if something doesn't want to grow in one spot, just leave it bare, and then plant native plants and things like that. Okay, there's a question about dandelions. Okay, so dandelions, obviously they're kind of a weed and they're really early blooming, so it's one of the few things you'll see out right now. As far as I know, I don't think dandelions are great, but I don't think they're bad either. You'll find some bees on them. Bees actually really like clover as well. I think clover tends to be better than dandelions. Simply there's more around. Clover is not native to here, but it's also not invasive in that it doesn't really survive well in urban areas. So, you'll find clover all around people's lawns in the area. And even though it's not from here, I think it's fine because it doesn't go wrecking urban or non-urban ecosystems in the way that like honeysuckle does, is really damaging forests in near urban areas. So yeah, I think just but like the dandelion doesn't really hurt anything. So I think just like keep your dandelion, keep the clover. There's a study out of Massachusetts that mowing every like 4 weeks as opposed to every 3 weeks improve the pollination value of your lawn by like 40% or something. So just waiting for those clover to grow a little bit before you chop them down is really great. If you don't want to remove your lawn entirely. And one of the reasons a lot of those lawn things are non-native is that North America doesn't have the same history of grazing as places like Europe does. We didn't have as many large herbivores as other places, so there wasn't the evolutionary adaptation of plants that can be grazed on multiple times, which is analogous to us chopping them down with a lawnmower multiple times and able to regrow. So a lot of the plants that you can mix in with your lawn to provide some floral resources like dandelion and different clovers, a lot of them are non-native because we just don't have those types of plants in North America. But once again, it doesn't. The whole question of nativeness is really complicated. It's not as cut and dry as native and non-native. There's native plants that aren't very good pollen sources. There's non-native plants that are good pollen sources. There's non-native plants that are good pollen sources and that are going to destroy ecosystems, and ones that don't. So for example, bees really like honeysuckle. That being said, I just spent an hour ripping out honeysuckle yesterday. So just because something's good for one organism, you need to think and weigh the pros and cons between the ecosystem as a whole. So in this case, even though honeysuckle is good for bees, I realize that it's really bad for the ecosystem overall, so I'm ripping it out. Whereas I'm leaving the clover in my lawn right now. So yeah, it's just urban areas are these weird places. They're called novel ecosystems because they're ecosystems that only occur because of human meddling. So agricultural systems are another example of a novel ecosystem. They were never found before humans decided to make them. So there's all these weird things going on, all these interplays between native and non-native plants, and artificial watering regimes and artificial tilling regimes and things like that. So you just have to consider everything that's going on and figure out what's best to, maintain the system, both for the organisms that live there, but also, economically, if you let your whole yard turn into a jungle, maybe it's going to lower the home value. So there's this balance between making it aesthetically pleasing and kind of, humans are able to live in it with it making it suitable for wildlife. Okay. Okay, there was a question about bee hotels. So bee hotels are they're structures that can provide resources to cavity nesting bees. So I was talking about ground nesting bees earlier, and now these are cavity nesting bees. Let me see if I can find a photo. So one of the big families you'll find they're called megachilid or leafcutter bees. I should have prepared more photos. If I was in the lab right now, I would have nice little specimens that I'd be holding up to the camera, but I don't. So these are, oh, here we go. I flipped upon it. So these are ground nesting bees or cavity nesting bees. So a lot of them will form a structure out of leaves like this. So that one's been taken out, but they form a cocoon of leaves, and so they'll kind of make like a channel. So they'll fill one nest, lay an egg, then put some leaves, then do another one and another one and another one. So bee hotels are essentially artificial structures that you can put in your yard to provide resources for cavity nesting bees. But yeah, if you think of in the wild, they're going to find these cavities in like sticks and stems and things like that. So they're going to be at pretty low density throughout the system. But a lot of the bee hotels that you'll see commercially made will have like hundreds of tubes for bees to nest in. And that's great because it's like, cool, I don't have to look for nesting sites. They're already right here. But the problem is, if you have a mite that comes or a parasite or a predatory organism, it also doesn't have to do any work. It finds one and it finds them all. It's, it's the nature equivalent of putting all your eggs in one basket. In this case, it's putting all your eggs in one bee hotel so that if something bad happens to one of them, there's a higher chance it's going to happen to all of them. So, bee hotels I think can be really neat. It's a really cool way to explore bee natural history and bee biology, and you can often watch bees better there than anywhere else because they're going to make repeated trips to it. But yeah, if the density is too high, then you're going to have problems. So I think bee hotels don't have to be bad, but just like anything else, you need to take care of it. So you want to get ones that are smaller, on the smaller end as opposed to larger. If you once the holes have been filled, you can actually remove them and put them somewhere else so that they can kind of not be as high density. And then also they need to be cleaned, just like you need to clean bird feeders and things like that. So I'd say, yeah, shy away from the ones that are really big, but if you take care of them, it can be okay. And there's quite a few resources to take care of them. I know the Caraval lab at Minnesota, I'm typing it in here, it might be spelled slightly wrong, lab at Minnesota, has a big guide for how to maintain bee hotels. But yeah, I think that they can be really neat. One of my favorite groups on Facebook, I think 50% of the time I'm on Facebook, is just to look at this one site, which is called like Bees in the Burbs, which is bees from Australia, and they're just crazy looking. My mom went to Australia and she got me some bee postcards, which made me really happy. So this is one bee, which is just like crazy. I mean, it's like blue and black. It's just so cool. And like, here's another one. I really like postcards too, so this joined my two interests. But the whole page is just devoted to taking photos of bees that are on bee hotels. So it can be a really good way to just watch bees and see them, just living their life. So yeah, I just think you need to be careful and take care of them just like you would with anything else. And avoid buying like the super big ones. They're pretty easy to make too, so I think if you make them, that might be better because you can make sure it meets all the specifications and it's not. This term is so common that it's become there's actual term. It's called bee washing. So just like greenwashing is making things seem green when they're really not. There are so many things that are bee washing, and so a lot of the like save the bee stuff you'll see. A lot of it's considered bee washing because once again, it's going towards honeybee stuff, which is like save the chicken. It's like honeybees are just not the ones that need the attention and the money. It's the native bees. So a lot of things are bee washing, just like a lot of the bee hotels that you'll see aren't really designed with the best science in mind. So they can actually be more harmful than helpful. So yeah, it's complicated, just like all this is. Oh wait, tips for building bee hotels. So it really depends on what supplies you have access to. You can take just a bunch of like thin bamboo stalks and just tie them with some twine and kind of put like a little roof on it. And yeah, that's all you need. If you have like a router or a really long drill bit, you can drill holes into pieces of wood and mount those. Once again, if you just Google the Caravel Lab at Minnesota and like bee hotel, they have like a big PDF of tips of what to do and what not to do. Yeah, I just made one for my mom for Christmas. I'll see how it turns out, but I was able to drill holes in the side and then put a piece of plexiglass. So you'll actually be able to see the bees make the nest, which will be cool if it works. She's in California, so the peak of her season starting now. So I'll have to check in with her and see if she gets any. But it will be really cool because different bee species use different things. So certain ones use leaves. So you'll see like punch out. If you ever see like a perfect circular punch out, either in the center of the leaf or the side of the leaf, that's from a bee. You'll see them. They like redbud. They like what else do they like? Viburnum, I think, and roses and things like that. So if you ever see these like perfectly circular cutouts, those are from bees. So some of them will use that. There's been ones that have used flowers and things like that. So lots of different things. Okay, that's all I have on bee hotels. Let's see. I answered that. Okay, we have a question. Should I make sure to have flowers in spring, or are there other times of the year when I should have flowers available for bees? So the goal is you want to have flowers that are available for the entire season that bees are out. So in the Midwest, starting about now until like late September. So options for now would be things like, you see like the Claytonia coming up and some of just the little spring ephemerals. I don't know if you can actually get seeds for those. I don't know. I'm just lucky and have a bunch growing in my yard right now. A lot of the early pollen sources are going to be kind of more tree/bush things. So you'll see some of the willows. We have the red buds coming out in probably like 4 days or 3 days. That's a really good source. And then you'll get like the dogwoods, and then you'll start to get a lot more of the shrubs and smaller forbs. And then obviously in the summer, you have pretty much like a lot of your flowers, and then you want to have some late blooming flowers too. So like tick-seed coreopsis is a late one, even like the fleabane, and like solidago, goldenrod. So yeah, if you can have sources for bees all throughout the season, that's really the best option if you want to attract the most bees. because there's certain bees that are only out really early in the year. So there's quite a few, they're called endrenid species that are mining bees. They, once again, nest in the ground. They really like pollinating trees. So they'll come out really early in the year. And then you have a big boom in like June and July and August. That's where you'll have most of your bees. And then there's ones that are even out in like September and October. And in September is when you're going to have the new queens, the new queen bumblebees, kind of like fattening up for the winter. So finding food for them late in the year is great. So yeah, just like, I mean, it's all it's each bee has their time and their specialized food sources. So just trying to provide for as many as you can. But you know, you can't do it all at once. So just, I think what I'm finding is just trying to like build your garden piecemeal. So just try to do, I don't know, a little bit of what you can. And what's great is about living in urban areas is you don't even need to do it all. So like, you know, befriend one of your neighbors and get them to focus on, you know, say late blooming sources, and you get the early blooming ones. And then between the two of you, you're providing great floral resources for bees. So yeah, like that's what's so cool about urban areas is the plots are so close together. So you could actually have the potential to, you know, with some of your neighbors, create a much larger area than you would by yourself, or a much more diverse area than you would by yourself. Okay. Can you show us or point us to resources or books that you've been using? So I need to still, let's see, best website for bee info. It's kind of everywhere at this point, which is hard. The pictures I've been showing you are from this book, which is going to be backwards for you. But The Bees in Your Backyard, which is by Joseph Wilson and Olivia Carroll. This one's just a good guide for identifying bees. So it's kind of more in the weeds if you're trying to identify the bees you have. Otherwise, the Camilo Lab, definitely we want to build out our resource page of information about for bees. So we're working on that. But yeah, bee info, it's kind of everywhere, unfortunately. You have a lot of contradictory things out there, but I think trying to find local sources is definitely going to be best. So you'll find stuff for the entire United States, but obviously the US is huge and we have a lot of different habitats. So when I'm looking for things, I'll try to go to like, you know, Midwest, whatever, and find it. So, but when I've looked for other people as well, a lot of times like botanical gardens have like a really good resource. So like Mobot, Missouri Botanic Garden has great stuff for Midwest stuff. It often takes a little bit of digging, but you can find it. But like the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center in Texas has great resources for the Texas area. I was just looking at DC for someone, and like the Washington DC Botanic Garden had a whole plant list. But yeah, I think just trying to find like reputable sources is, I mean, always difficult. But in general, a lot of them just have like plant lists and things like that. So I think it's often easier to find the plant lists than it is to find the plants. So that's obviously a difficulty, but yeah, I haven't found like one place that has everything. It just takes some looking. So I think that's something I could definitely work on, you know, joining up with other people to make it, because I definitely don't have the expertise. We have a comment that the Heather Holmes books are quite good. I haven't checked those out, so I will take the word for it. But yeah, the resources thing is hard. It's but like yeah, the Grow Native, which is through, it's like the Midwest, I guess. I think it's like grownative.org. They have lots of information for native things. A lot of those, like, I don't know, it's hard because you'll find stuff that's like kind of more built to like land managers out in rural areas versus what does well in cities is really different. But the Missouri Botanic Garden Plant Finder is good because they have a lot of info about the plant, um, including like what type of sun and things it looks like that. So that's the I'm putting it in the notes if anyone wants it. Plant Finder. And I don't know if it's still open right now with everything going on in the world, but the Kemper Center for Home Garden at the Missouri Botanic Garden has a call-in line, which is kind of like the Butterball Turkey call-in line. I've actually called them. It's just a bunch of like really nice, well-informed people, and you can call them with like your very specific question, and they'll answer it. So I once called them about some like weird thing growing on one of my houseplants, and they were able to troubleshoot it with me over the phone. So that was really exciting. So yeah, there's lots of resources, and I think it's just about talking to people who seem to know what they're doing and ask them what works. Okay. I have about like 15 minutes left. If anyone has questions, I'm also happy to go on a little rant about the history of lawns in America, if anyone's interested. Okay, I'm going to talk about garden lawns. I grew up in California. I grew up in the Bay Area, and we had a lawn growing up. Getting seeds for pollinators, I don't know. I just moved to the Midwest, and like I fully don't. I know some. Yeah, I was looking yesterday, but there's also lots of seeds being sold out right now because everyone's home, so they're in a garden. But I'm gonna talk to you about garden lawns because I've been reading up on them a lot instead of doing the other things I should be doing. Okay, so I grew up in California, and we had a lawn growing up in my like small urban house, and then we got a big drought, and I want to say like 2005. This wasn't like the huge one that everyone heard about. This was like the one before then, and the utility company actually was offering money for people to rip out their lawn. So my mom actually got like $750 to rip out the lawn, because lawns take a lot of water, especially in California, because you need to water them all year round. And then it was just crazy, like over the next few years, how few lawns you saw. So more and more people were ripping them out, to the point where I was like pretty used to not seeing lawns anymore. My parents were divorced and lived a mile apart, and I remember one time walking from one house to the other and counting how many lawns I saw, and it was something like 5 for like hundreds of houses. So I just got used to not seeing lawns, and then I moved to upstate New York for school, and everyone had lawns. Like I didn't see any plants anymore. It was just lawns absolutely everywhere. And I just wasn't used to it, and it was just kind of shocking. And I started to like really notice them, and just how prevalent they were, and also just like how loud it was on weekends with everyone mowing their lawn. One thing about that was nice in my neighborhoods growing up is you don't get woken up by 8 a.m. on a Saturday with people mowing their lawns because there's no lawns to mow. So I got interested in looking at lawns and reading about them. And it turns out that lawns are like not an American phenomenon at all. So what happened is all the like Thomas Jefferson and all those guys that were in the US, but also like going to France, got really into the European style of gardening with these really long, huge lawns. And they brought those seeds back to America, and then started like, you know, ripping out all the native wild things and putting in lawns. And lawns were super labor intensive, so the only reason they were able to be successful was they had slaves to help maintain them. But because whatever they did was fashionable, it then spread out and became the thing that, you know, rich people had as a status symbol, because you can't maintain a lawn, especially before, you know, even push mowers, let alone the electronic or gas powered ones. If you don't have a lot of money to hire help to maintain the lawns. So lawns become a status symbol in America just because they're not meant to be here and they're a pain to maintain. So these lawns then became, status symbols and tied to home values and things like that. And then you have the advent of things like homeowners associations where, there's actually regulations on what you can plant in your yard, and it's all on the based on maintaining, this semblance of conformity and value of the house and things like that. And at the same time, our food systems are becoming more decentralized, so people aren't growing their own food anymore. And all of a sudden, all everyone has is these perfectly manicured lawns. And then you have all these lawn companies coming up that kind of feed into it and, come knock on your door and say that your lawn isn't, up to standard and things like that. So all of a sudden, you have this huge, just ramping up of lawns, which are essentially non-native. They're all from like Europe, like even Kentucky bluegrass. It's called Kentucky, but it's not from here. So all of a sudden you have all these cities which used to have flowers and just kind of whatever was native, whatever grew, because it's really hard to cut things down, and whatever's there is there, to these cities and newer suburbs and things like that that just are completely depopulated of native plants. And then you have, which hurts like the native bees and the birds and all that. So it has all these ecological ramifications. And that's when urban areas were sort of seen as these like dead zones where nothing lived. But, as time goes on, there's kind of, there's finally, I'd say we're in a resurgence where we're having a lot more people value native plants and value gardening again. We're kind of have this backlash. So now we're seeing, I think for the better, a lot more information and a lot more resources put toward getting people to plant native plants, and kind of this backlash against the lawn, which I think is for the best. So, back in 2006 or whatever, in my hippy dippy California town, we got the utility company to pay for us to remove our lawn. But now we're seeing places like the whole state of Minnesota will pay you to rip out your lawn. So we're kind of seeing this cultural shift in cities, and I think it's for the best because, like lawns are pretty much ecologically useless. You get some robins on it and things like that, but you're not getting any of the, like a perfectly green lawn, you're not getting really any pollinators on it. A lot of the bugs a lot of the other insects have a hard time surviving because the levels of fertilizer are too high for them. They're essentially deserts. They're green, but not many things can live on them. So even like having some, even just the letting your lawn go a little bit fallow and letting the clover grow in it just really transforms your yard into a dead zone into something that, provides some resources to some things. I'm still, I don't know, I've been out of California now for, I guess, what year is it? 8 years now, and I'm still not used to seeing lawns everywhere. I don't know, it just makes me sad. It's just, I think just because they're just, your area of land can be so much more than just like a green carpet. It can like support life, but if it's just like a lawn, if you're not having like, there's obviously points if you want to like, if you have like a dog running on it or kids or something like that, but there's, it's like, what space are you using? Like if it has a utility, then that's one thing. I play ultimate frisbee and I like to run on clean fields, not ones with like giant dips and holes and bramble in them. But if there's an area that's not really being used for, recreation or something like that, can it have more use? And like clover's a flower. It has pollen. It can provide pollen resources. You'll especially see bumblebees and honeybees on clover, but you will see some other things as well. So I don't know if averse to anything. It's just to like rethink the lawn and what can you do to alter it and make it more useful. And yeah, as Missouri Wildflower Nursery is one of the best in the area for Missouri seeds. But yeah, if you're in other areas, pretty much every region has something like that. You can also, collect seeds, and then, make sure it's okay from where you're collecting them. But I got to do a seed swap with some of my friends in the fall, and that was fun. Everyone collecting different seeds that they have and passing them around. So I planted a bunch in my yard, and we'll see what grows. I'm still working on my yard. We've only been in here for a year, so it definitely takes time to establish what you have. And if you're renting or something like that, it could be harder to, one, convince your landlord, and two, to like take the time to do something if you're going to leave in a year or two. But you can always do stuff in pots and things like that. Okay. I have a few more minutes if there's like one more question. Let's see. Oh yeah, so there's going to be in St. Louis, there's going to be a native plant expo and swap in September. Yeah, what sucks is there's so many like things that were supposed to happen right now. Like the Shaw Nature Reserve was supposed to do a wildflower swap and things like that, and they've all been canceled. So it's hard. We got a question about my favorite bee. I like green shiny things. So my favorite bees are actually green metallic sweat bees. Here's one. This one is Agapostamon. I don't know. I guess that one's Virescens. So they're green and they're shiny. And the males for Agapostamon virescens have these yellow legs and these striped abdomens. And I think they're really cool. And they're also just really common in urban areas, which is nice. So they're easy to see. Nomia are super cool. So you just Google it. Nomia bees have this like mother of pearl, so it looks like abalone on their abdomen. I don't know how much a picture could do it justice, but when you have a dead one on a pin and you can like shine it in the light, it's really cool because just the colors are crazy. Yeah, bees are really cool just because they have so much variation in color and size and patterning. There's just, if you just take some time, you'll start to see like how many there are. On that note, I guess one thing I'm looking forward to this summer is even if things are really shut down, we're in the midst of putting together a citizen science project where people can take pictures of bees in their yard and then submit them to iNaturalist. And we're going to use it to see if we can use that to monitor bee diversity. So yeah, I think I love iNaturalist. It's like kind of my favorite social media right now, if you want to call it that. But just going on and seeing what different people find in the area is really fun. So I'm excited to see if this project will be successful. But yeah, we're going to have people just take photos of bees. You don't need to be able to ID them. Then post them on iNaturalist. Someone else will help you ID them, and we'll kind of use it to look at the distribution of bees within urban residential gardens. Because it's just in your garden, then you don't need to go outside and interact with other people. You can maintain your social distance. But yeah, like just spending a few minutes at just like perching at a flower. My neighbors think I'm crazy because I'm always just like out there, usually in my slippers these days, just like staring at, we have some of the grape hyacinth in our yard. So I've just been perching out there for like 5 minutes and seeing what comes out. Because you'll see a lot of bees. There's ones that, other common ones you'll see are like the Seratinas and the Hylaeus. So they're probably about 4 or 5 millimeters across. So they're super tiny. They might look like flies because they don't really have much hair on them. But they're actually both cavity or Seratina. don't remember what serotinas are. Hylaeus are cavity nesting bees, so they need little holes that are about 1/8 of an inch diameter across. So yeah, you'll see those up to some really big bumblebees and things like that. So definitely, I don't know, it can be exciting in a fun way just to perch out there, just kind of sit quietly and see what buzzes around, even to just, some clover you have out, or really just any flower. Yeah. But yeah, this has been fun. It's kind of weird talking into the void, but I hope you all learned something. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me or hit me up on Twitter or anything like that. You can email the lab. Our lab website is Camilo BLab, blab.com. And we have an email on there. I mostly check the email, so if you feel free to email me, and I'll answer any of your questions, or you can hit me up on Twitter, just at my name. And yeah, that's all I got for now. But thanks so much for tuning in. And yeah, take some time in the next month or two to just check out some bees. There's going to be a lot on the redbuds and the dogwoods starting in a few weeks, or the redbuds in the next phase, and the dogwoods a few weeks after that. Get out there with your camera. Highly recommend taking the burst mode, so it takes a bunch of photos at once, because these bees are hard to catch. And then yeah, send them to me, and I'll try to help you ID them. I'm trying to get better. Or go on to just make an iNaturalist account and upload them there. And someone will help you ID them. And yeah, that's all I got. Hope you all have a good day. Thanks.